Warm welcome to this lecture series on organizational behavior. I am Dr. MP Ganesh. We are in the second chapter, which is on perception. We are in the last and final section on this chapter. So I'll quickly summarize what happened in the previous lectures in this chapter. So we defined what is perception. So perception is the process of giving meaning to sensory stimulus through organizing and interpreting it. So perception is subjective in nature, which means a same thing, different people can perceive it differently. We also looked at why it is important to understand perception in workplace. We also looked at the basic elements of perception, the steps involved in sensory perception, which are two steps: one, selection and screening of information, and organization of stimuli. We also looked at what are the sub processes what are the techniques people use in selection of stimuli. Selection of stimuli depends on various factors, and these factors can be classified into internal and external factors. So we looked at both these internal and external factors. We also looked at the techniques humans use to organize perceptual stimuli. We also looked at how these principles or these techniques humans use to organize and interpret or select and organize stimuli can lead to illusions or error. The second part of the lecture of this chapter, we spoke about social perception, which is about how perception is relevant in social context. So social perception, more specifically, we spoke about identity and attribution. The idea of identity is trying to understand someone based on their try to understand someone in terms of who they are. Identity also involves identity of oneself. So we also try to understand whom we are. More specifically, we use social identity to understand personal identity. So social identity theory says in personal identity we use both personal characteristics and also the social group in which we belong to. This holds true for others also. When you try to understand who is this person, we will use personal qualities of that person and also the social group in which this person belongs to make sense out of the identity of the other person. We also looked at attribution of causality. We looked at the Kelly's theory of causal attribution, which talks about three criteria humans use to understand whether a certain behavior is caused by internal factors or external factors. In fact, in the last class we had an elaborate discussion about attribution theory using an example. Okay, so we also looked at in the previous class what are the problems we might encounter because of perceptual biases, or what are the kind of perceptual biases which can happen in social perception. If you remember, we looked at halo effect, team halo effect, attribution error. So attribution error is when we try to understand or attribute others' behavior, we use internal causes. If somebody does wrong, we attribute it to themselves. But if we do wrong, or if something goes wrong in our behavior, we attribute it to external causes. So these are some of the biases we looked at. We also looked at the power of perception, which means even though perception is a very subjective thing, it has the power to create realities. In other words, when we perceive someone or something in a certain way, there are more chances that it will become real. So we looked at Pygmalion effect and Golem effect. Pygmalion effect is also called a self-fulfilling prophecy, which means when we have a certain kind of expectation on others, that expectation tend to become real. In other words, if you consider someone as a good person or a bad person, if you perceive them as a good person or a bad person, in spite of what the person really is, over a period of time, that person becomes either good or bad, depending on your perception. Why it happens? Because of our perception or our subjective judgment, we tend to react to that person in a certain way. And over a period of time, the other person also responds to the way we react to them. So the reaction can, the way we interact with them can be in the form of verbal communication, non-verbal communication, body language, the kind of prejudices we show and things like that. So Golem effect is when we set lower standard or lower goals to co-work or subordinates or students, they tend to underperform those standards which are already low. So which says when you set goals, it is always better to set higher goals to people so that they will perform to their optimal level instead of setting lower goals where they underperform. Okay, so this is where we stopped in the previous lecture. In the previous lecture, if you remember, I asked you to read about stereotype, more specifically job stereotype. Did you read? Were you able to find and find something in the internet? Were you able to understand and comprehend? Anyway, I'll explain. Okay, just think, I'll give you a word, just visualize this job title. Okay, so the job title is scientist. Okay, so how do you visualize a scientist? Just take a minute. How will a scientist look like? How old will be a scientist? Try to visualize more descriptively. Okay, give give an identity to this scientist. Personify this word. Okay. So many of us visualize scientists as someone who's of middle age, bald, a male individual, someone who's wearing a lab coat, somebody who looks very uptight, someone who never smiles, maybe somebody with a spectacle, things like this. Okay, so this is like when you hear this word doctor, how will you personify a doctor? How will you visualize a doctor? Let's say if I give you a more specific detail, someone who's a neurosurgeon. Okay, how will you personify this doctor? Maybe around in his 50s, male, maybe bald, maybe without mustache, and someone who looks very brisk, someone who looks very intellectual, isn't it? Someone who wears a stethoscope, things like that. So these are job stereotypes. Why they are job stereotypes? Because these are gender stereotypes, but we use these criteria when we talk about certain jobs. These are also job stereotypes. So why this is a job stereotype? Because when you say doctor, especially a neurosurgeon or a scientist, we visualize someone who's of a typical nature or a typical person, which many a times may not necessarily be true. Okay, for example, scientist, I'll show you the next slide. Many of you would have seen this picture, isn't it? These are our ISRO scientists, and most of them are women, and they are not like wearing a formal wear or a lab coat. They are like as similar as anybody else. They are like as normal as anybody else. But when you visualize scientists, if I give you detail like female scientists, you will visualize female scientists as someone who's wearing a modern dress, maybe an European, isn't it, fair skinned, or someone who's very tall, and all these associations we make. Why do we make these associations? This is how we see these job roles in our popular media, isn't it? For example, in advertisements, many of these advertisements you get to see these doctors. Okay, so these doctors, if they are related to small children, these are female doctors. If these are, or these incidences are related to germs and all those stuff, or dental and all those stuff, you see male doctors. So the popular media describes, or even in our day-to-day narratives, the way we talk, the way we understand or narrate something, we use certain qualities for certain jobs, isn't it? For example, in this picture, we narrate a scientist, or when we talk about scientists, usually we talk about male scientists. There are also very few female scientists in certain areas like STEM education. I mean, STEM means science, technology, engineering and medicine. There are very few women compared to men. But even then, the kind of understanding or attitude we have towards these women scientists, or scientists who are in from minority groups, we don't actually take them into consideration. If they are minority, they are less, but they are also a significant part of that group. But when we see the larger category of scientist or a doctor, these people don't come to our visual field. We don't actually pay much attention to them. For example, mathematician. So there are quite a number of female mathematicians. Even though they are minority, there are very reputed female mathematicians. But many of us don't know who are these mathematicians. Why? Because, like I said, in popular media, in our day-to-day discussion, they don't figure in our discussions. So these are job stereotypes. I'll give another example. When I say nurse, okay, which is a very gender stereotyped job, which is a very gender loaded job in India especially. When I say nurse, who should be a nurse? A female, most probably from a certain state in India, and maybe very young, isn't it? Why? Because does nurse is a gender loaded word? No, it is a gender neutral word. But there can be male nurses also, nurses of different states, nurses of different age groups. But for us, even though we have seen male nurses, that particular visualization doesn't come to our mind. Okay, so these are job stereotypes. Okay, I'll quickly define what is stereotyping. Stereotyping means we give a certain, in a very common understanding, stereotyping means generalization. Okay, in fact, in the earlier section also I spoke to you about stereotyping. I'll repeat again. When you talk about a particular social group, it can be a professional group, or it can be people of a certain region, or it can be people of a certain gender, or it can be people of a certain religious background. So these are groups we encounter. So when we talk about a certain group, we associate that group with certain qualities, and we generalize that qualities to all the members of that social group. Okay, let's say if I say, like I said earlier, nurse, I visualize this nurse as a female, young, from a particular state. This is the general characteristics I give to this group, and I believe all these nurses in this, whoever I encounter should be like this. If someone is not fitting into that generalization, it becomes a disturbance for us. There is a cognitive disturbance. Okay, so in order to avoid that cognitive disturbance, we try to only perceive or try to put ourselves to encounter only those social situations where our assumptions synchronize with the reality. I mean, this is again the consequence of stereotyping. Okay, like the example which I gave, politicians, okay, or teachers, or marketing representative, all those things, or driver. So these are professional stereotypes or job stereotypes. It can be other things also. If I talk about Gujaratis, many times we think they are business people. When we say Punjabis, we talk about probably they are like very jovial people, or someone who's like very athletic kind of people. Okay, so these are some of the assumptions we make based on gender stereotyping. The major negative impact of stereotyping is selective perception, like I said earlier. So we tend to not see people who don't comply to this stereotyping we already made. For example, driver. Let's say there's a female driver. Many times, if you think about driver, professional drivers, we think about male drivers. But let's say if they are female drivers, we don't even pay attention to them. Similarly, mathematicians, they're very good, female mathematicians, but we never register those, female mathematicians. Selective perception also involves, let's say I assume these are the qualities of a person from this social group. I tend to see only those qualities in that person. Other qualities which may not align with the other social group, which will not align with my understanding of that social group, I will reject it. I will not select those information. For example, like I said, Gujaratis are business people. Okay, so but let's say there is a Gujarati, who's probably a scientist, okay, or who's probably a language expert. In fact, there are many people, Gujaratis, who are language experts and scientists, but we have certain qualities which we think are Gujarati qualities. So this person is a Gujarati, so I will try to fit in all the qualities in that person. Some qualities that person is not exhibiting, or a newer quality that person is exhibiting which is not fitting into my understanding, I will not perceive those qualities. Okay. For example, let's say salesperson. We assume all the salespeople are, they try to persuade us and try to sell things without telling us the truth. Let's say if some salesperson is a very, honest salesperson, we will not see those qualities. Okay. The second negative impact of stereotyping is bias and prejudice. So bias means wrong judgment, okay, or inclining in a certain way, or not being balanced. So for example, you assume, let's say there's an interview, you assume people of a certain state or a certain background or people from certain college are highly intelligent. Okay, so even without probing more, even without getting more information, we assume this person will be intelligent. Okay, so let's say in an interview somebody says I am from IIT Bombay. Okay, so we assume that this person should be intelligent. I mean, I'm not saying it is wrong, but in real sense we need to probe more, isn't it? So this is positive bias. There can be negative bias also. Negative bias means the bias will become, or it becomes bad for the person whom we are judging. So for example, let's say you're doing an interview, this person who's looks in a certain way, looks very shabby, or not shabby, I mean not well dressed, or someone from a certain low socio-economic status, his or her English is not very good. So we assume that this person may not be very intelligent. Okay, so this is what is bias. Bias against a certain social group. Okay, prejudice is prejudgment. So even without, so bias and prejudice are interrelated. So even without understanding someone, even without getting more information, we prejudge. Okay, so for example, let's say someone looks in a certain way, and you have a certain kind of a stereotype towards that particular social group or the person who looks like that. We tend to prejudge. We tend to judge even before we collect more information. Okay, so how is this important in job context? There are many different ways this is a very important phenomena, these biases or these consequences of job stereotyping or even stereotyping has a lot of consequences in human resource management. But one thing I would like to stress, or which I like to discuss, is gender stereotyping in workplace. Okay, so not just workplace, like I mentioned earlier, STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and medicine. Like I said earlier, there are very few women in these disciplines at higher levels. Okay, levels in which, like senior researchers or senior professors or senior technicians, engineers, we find very few women in these fields. Especially, there are assumptions that women don't fit into these kind of jobs. I mean, again, which is like a very biased opinion, and it's a very politically wrong opinion, which is untrue. But many people assume that why there are very few women in these fields, because all these ideas of right brain, left brain, and all those stuff. Women are very good in arts related fields, creative fields. Men are very good in rational or logic related fields, which is not very scientifically proven. Okay, so these kind of assumptions, what happens because of these assumptions is, one, in terms of recruitment to top level fields, many times these people from minority groups like gender or certain social groups, they are not selected. So bias in terms of selection and appraisal plays a very strong role in due to stereotyping, especially for women and minorities. Okay, so we call it glass ceiling effect. Glass ceiling effect means there are many women at the bottom and middle level of management or even in STEM fields, but there are very few women who go to the top. So this is what is glass ceiling. Why it is glass ceiling? Because you think there is no barrier, but there is a barrier. So what is this barrier? These barriers like stereotyping, bias, which many of us may not even acknowledge. Many of these managers who are involved in selection and recruitment or promotions, they may not even be aware that these biases operate in their mind when they are doing selection and appraisal. So, many of these glass ceiling effect are because of stereotyping related issues. Impression management techniques is, people can use these stereotype or biases in a positive way also. Like I said, people are trained to face interviews. They are trained to say certain things in a certain way, how to sit, how to look at your interviewer, how to shake hands, and all those things. So these things are very superficial. They may not even mean they are confident. They are trained to interact in a certain way. That doesn't mean that these people are capable enough to resolve the issues in real life work situations. But because of these techniques, and there are issues related to perceptual bias, we tend to label them as good performers or good candidates. So these are some of the problems which can happen because of perception related biases and also stereotyping in HR related decisions. Just another example, when you see this instrument stethoscope, what comes to your mind? Okay, many times if it is certain areas of medicine like gynecology, we think about women gynecology, or pediatrician, we think about women doctors. When we think about neurosurgeon or psychiatrist, we think about male doctors, which may not be true. Similarly, if you look at this instrument, a sewing machine, who will you associate with this particular picture? Who will use this sewing machine? We think, if it is hobby or if it is used in home, it must be a woman. If it is used in a professional context, it must be a male, okay, or male or female. But many times, if who will use this at home, it will be a female, okay. So these are some of the problems, perception perceptual biases are related to. Okay, so this is the end of the chapter. So I'll quickly summarize what happened in the today's lecture. So we looked at job stereotypes and we defined what is stereotyping, and we also looked at what are the key issues in stereotyping and also why stereotyping happens. And more specifically in HR, what are the problems associated with stereotyping and perceptual biases. Okay, I'll stop here. The next chapter we will look at this idea called personality. So it's a very interesting topic. We'll look at personality in the next chapter. Till then, have a good time and see you in the next lecture. See you. Bye.